Welcome to the Motley Stew Show. My name is Luke Goldstein, and this week we're going to talk about Charlie Hebdo and the attacks in Paris. What we know, what we don't know, and why that matters. On Wednesday, January 7th, a couple men walked into the offices of the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo and murdered 12 people, including 8 journalists, and injured many others. Just a couple days later, 2 other assailants went into a grocery store in the Jewish corner of Paris and took more hostages, killed a few people there, injured others, before that came to an end with one of the assailants dead and the other one still missing. Now, what some people might see as 2 pieces of terrorism only connected as some sort of proof of a religious oncoming storm, these were actually completely connected and part of a complex plan that is seemingly cut down for the time being. As I go through the rest of the story, I will try my best to pronounce these the best that I know how, which might not be right in many of these cases. These 2 brothers, Sharif Kouachi and Saeed Kouachi, were the 2 people who attacked the offices of Charlie Hebdo. After they perpetrated this heinous act, they ran, and they were eventually cornered in a print shop northeast of Paris. They had one hostage, which eventually was freed, but the brothers themselves were killed. Now, they had no plans of living through this standoff. They wanted to go out as martyrs, and the police gave them their wish. The brothers came out of the print shop firing and were killed instantly. Now, the grocery store attack. The store was called Hyper Kosher Supermarket, and that attack was perpetrated by these 2, Ahmedi Kouliaby and his ex-girlfriend Hayat Boudadiene. Now, he was killed in the raid, while his ex-girlfriend actually got away. At the time of this filming, over 1,000 people are looking for her all over France. It's assumed she escaped in the chaos while the hostages were being freed. Now, it has since come to light that these 2 attacks were not loosely connected by ideology, but in fact directly connected by intricate and complex planning. All 3 of the men involved actually knew the same cleric and they knew each other. There were also 500 calls between Boudadiene and Sheriff Kouachi's wife the previous year. So right off the bat, this was not just the idea of Muslims going crazy and starting to take revenge on the Western world. This was planned. This was intentional. And there was going to be more, it seems, but things got stopped in their tracks. From the instant that these attacks washed across the globe, 2 opinions and reactions were touted loud and proud. First, there was the bold and steadfast support of the people at Charlie Hebdo, with the rallying cry of Je suis Charlie, which means I am Charlie in French. Their magazine was actually the tip of the spear for these attacks because of images like this. Now, in some readings of the Quran, it is forbidden to depict the Prophet Muhammad, and for this act, the cartoonists and journalists at Charlie Hebdo were slaughtered. Many around the world saw this as a direct attack on freedom of speech, and also an example of religious law being touted over all other religions and secular laws. And let's also point out that this is not the first time religions have had images that they found to be offensive used. Charlie Hebdo did not just pick on Muslims, they picked on everybody equally. If you want to say that they were offensive, they were equally offensive to everybody. So let's tackle this part first. Yes, the attackers did choose this magazine because they had printed images of the Prophet Muhammad. And it is reported that they actually yelled, "We have avenged the Prophet," when they finished the attack or as they were leaving. But if that was their mission, they failed incredibly. For 2 reasons. One, all the images of Muhammad that Charlie Hebdo printed previously are now everywhere. They are spread far and wide, much farther than they had been previously. And 2, the people at Charlie Hebdo have vowed to not back down. In fact, the next issue of Charlie Hebdo is being printed again with Muhammad on the cover, and it's even being helped by Google and other companies to print a massive influx of copies of this issue, way past what they usually would do. Charlie Hebdo usually prints between 30 and 60,000 copies. We're talking about 3 million copies this time. Now, the problem here is also that the argument is flawed from the start, because it compares 2 things that are not equal. Secular laws, like the freedom of speech, are created by governments, and those governments have powers over preset lands inside of borders. The French governments create laws for France, the Russian government creates laws for Russia, and so on and so forth. Those laws have a concrete reach. Religious laws, on the other hand, don't. They have no boundaries, no border, and no corner of the globe where they can't reach. A person of religious faith can travel all the way around the world, taking their faith with them in every single location. So if some people believe that their holy text tells them that it's wrong to depict the Prophet Muhammad, then to a certain subset of those people, their religious law trumps the secular one. Now, the second opinion that was touted loud and proud deals with the idea of Islam as a whole. Many people in the media, on TV, online, and in print all want to paint Islam with one broad brush. All Islam is evil. Islam is not a religion of peace. It's more the same stuff that we saw after 9/11. Yet, to label 1.5 billion people with the same brush is not only idiotic, it's dangerous. To say that every single Muslim in the world is the same as these terrorists in France or the people who flew the planes into the World Trade Center is flat out wrong. Here's a couple of examples. In the case of the kosher supermarket, it was actually a young Muslim named Lassana Bathili who actually is credited for saving a number of the customers in that store. What he did was, once the attack was underway, he had the sense to move a bunch of the customers into the walk-in freezer. Then he told them to stay there, close the door and lock them in, and then turned off the AC. Then he went to either get more people or try to escape. He was able to escape by getting out through the lift, but once he got out, he was immediately arrested by the police because they didn't know whether or not he was part of the attack. Now, before people get into the idea of racial profiling and that's why he was arrested, this is bound to happen, and it was a good thing because this is a high-tension situation. There was no way to prove who he was. But he quickly explained who he was, they let him go, he gave them detailed layouts of inside the store, where the people were, and how to get to them. He also gave them a key to the back door so that they wouldn't have to bust it in, making a lot of noise. Once all these hostages were freed after it was all over, many of them came to Lassana and thanked them with great gratitude for their lives. In the case of Charlie Hebdo, it was a 40-year-old police officer named Ahmed Merabet who was actually killed while trying to get the terrorists after the attack. He was shot in the line of duty, and although not killed on the first shot, he was laying on the ground when one of the attackers, one of the terrorists, came up to him. Words were exchanged, and then he was shot point blank in the head. All of this was actually captured on cell phone video. This particular example of a Muslim actually standing on the right side of the issue gained a lot of traction on the internet because they co-opted the Je suis Charlie hashtag and changed it to Je suis Ahmed, meaning I am Ahmed in French. Then there was this particular tweet that was retweeted thousands upon thousands of times. I am not Charlie. I am Ahmed, the dead cop. Charlie ridiculed my faith and culture, and I died defending his right to do so. Stuff like that will get you remembered for a really long time. Yet those two examples alone were not enough to stop people from saying it was actually the fault of all Muslims and all Islam, specifically because the moderate Muslims, those who would never think of perpetrating something like this, were not denouncing the attacks loudly enough. While researching this episode, my favorite quote on this topic actually came from Reza Aslan, who's a prominent religious scholar. Anyone who keeps saying that we need to hear the moderate voice of Islam, why aren't Muslims denouncing these violent attacks, doesn't own Google. He continued, the answer to Islamic bigotry is Islamic pluralism, and so that's why I put the onus on the Muslim community. But I also recognize that that work is being done, that the voice of condemnation is deafening, and if you don't hear it, you're not listening. Too true. These short-sighted people are not listening. The problem is, thinking about things like this actually takes away their carefully curated worldview and their easy way of painting all these problems with one brush. Just arrest all Muslims, just eavesdrops on all Muslims, wipe away Islam. That will fix everything. So I decided to go looking for these condemnations from these moderate Muslims, and not only did I find them from moderate Muslims, I found them from extremists as well, and it took me no time to find. The head of Lebanese Hezbollah, Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, who, let's face it, is not exactly a friend of all religions. Dalil Boubakour, head of the Great Mosque in Paris, the Arab League, Al-Hazar, which is a prominent Sunni school, that was only the beginning. Dozens upon dozens of other groups hit the web immediately to condemn these violent and atrocious acts of terrorism. When you look through the red haze of fear and hatred, what you actually see, what we're dealing with, is a small faction inside a complex and intricate religion, which in itself is compiled of many sects that are all competing for domination over the whole. And some of these factions have chosen the path of violence and fear as their way to victory, and because of that, it clouds the entire belief the same. Why choose this path? Because it works. Spectacular acts of terrorism will often result in spectacular acts of retaliation. which falls instantly into the trap that the terrorists are laying for us. They recruit hundreds and hundreds of new members by saying that people in the Western countries, the Western governments, Europe, are all bullies and thugs that are pushing their culture on the rest of the world and destroying innocent people and innocent lives and innocent cultures without a care. So when Europe and the US drop Hellfire missiles all over the Middle East, they just run in and get pictures of the kids, the innocents that were actually killed in those bombings, and now they've got a new recruitment flyer. Now, I'm not advocating for no retaliation, and I'm not advocating for a kiss and hug pacifist mentality. I'm just saying we have to be smarter than they are, not just bigger. The decade plus of war that we just went through should have taught us that by now. So what do you think? Do you think Islam as a whole is to blame? How should France react now? What do you think they should do to keep their country secure? What should other people do? Leave your comments down below. Thanks for watching another episode of the Motley Stew Show. You can like, favorite, share, subscribe. All those things are really helpful to the show. Stay tuned for next week. And as always, here's your little bit of Logan. Ready? And some of these factions have chosen the path of violence and fear as their way to victory, and because of that, it clouds the entire belief the same. Why choose this path? Because it works.